So in the last video, we talked about how the economy can fluctuate in terms of activity when desired spending is different than actual spending on output. And we looked at the income circular flow, and we said, look, this is how the two market participants interact in two different markets, and there are injections into the income circular flow, and there are leakages in the income circular flow. And this is what causes economic activity to fluctuate. Well, let's look at it a different way. Here are the leakages and the injections, right? Let's look at it from a line graph. So here we have time on the horizontal axis, and let's say we have the level of economic activity, real GDP. And we could see over time, it grows at a certain rate, but it's not this predictable. In other words, the economy can grow on average, let's say 3% per year. But some years it grows a little faster, some years it grows slower, and the actual growth rate looks like this, right? It grows around the trend. And so you could see here we have a peak and trough. So this is a peak of the business cycle. This is the trough or bottom point of the business cycle. So you can see here when this red line is sloping upward like this, that means economic activity is accelerating or growing. And when it's downward like this, that means economic activity is contracting. And you could see it can grow and expand around the long run trend. Now, again, I just explained what could cause the economy to increase, what can cause the economic activity to decrease. It is the relationship between leakages and injections. So can you see here between these two dotted lines, economic activity is sloping downward. That means there is more air leaking out of the economy that's being injected in the economy. So leakages are greater than injections. What about here? Can you see how the red line is sloping upward? That means leakages are less than injections. Less than. So this relationship between leakages and injections is going to tell you if the economy is growing or if the economy is contracting. Now again, a primary leakage of the income circular flow is savings. Now, this kind of makes savings seem like a bad thing. Well, it's not necessarily bad as long as that savings can find its way back into the economy in the form of an injection. So let's look at the consumption function. This is what we looked at in chapter 9. And that's the consumption function is consumer spending, that's C, is going to equal autonomous spending plus what we called it, it was X, Y, right? And so this X, that's the marginal propensity to consume. Y is income, right? And that's what we hear here. So we see here is $100 billion. That's the autonomous component of this. Here's your marginal propensity to consume, 0.75, and this is your income. So let's say you're earning, or the income needed to put everyone to work is $3 trillion. Well, if people earn, let me erase this. If people earn this much in terms of income, how much will consumer spending be? Well, you take for the 300 billion, 3,000 billion that you earned, consumers only spend 75% of it. They save the other 25%. And then there is some income that it's not dependent upon, there is some spending that's not dependent upon your income. That's autonomous spending. And we see that this works out to $2,350 billion of spending. Now, do you see how spending, consumer spending, is less than income? And this means the level of activity cannot be maintained because people are not spending the money on all of this stuff that they're producing. What would that look like on a supply and demand graph? Well, it would look like this. If you need to earn or need to produce at least 3,000 billion worth of output to put everyone to work, but people are only spending this much, you could see that this is going to be a surplus. And that means you cannot maintain this level of activity. The level of activity is going to diminish. Prices will start to fall, and then supply will move this way, demand will move this way, and we're going to come to a new level of output, QE. And notice how this new level of output is less than the full employment level of output. So that's what it basically looks like from the supply and demand point of view, when your level of spending is not equal to the level of spending needed to put everybody to work. So can the economy adjust back to the full employment level of output? Well, classical economists believe that it could. All you need is flexible interest rates and flexible prices. In other words, if you're unemployed, all you've got to do is lower your asking wage rate to get somebody to help you or to hire you. If you've got unsold goods and services in your store, all you've got to do is lower your price to get somebody to buy it. That was the assumption that classical economists made to say that the economy self-adjusts. And this would lead to full employment. Again, according to classical economists, if interest rates fell far enough, businesses would invest, and if wages fell far enough, employers would hire. But John Maynard Keynes, the British economist, disagreed with classical economists. He said that prices are not necessarily flexible. They can be rigid or fixed. I think he used the word sticky. Sticky prices simply means prices do not necessarily adjust, at least in enough time to maintain full level of employment. And what he said is the economy could get into a problem. In other words, let's say you need to produce $3,000 billion worth of goods and services. Well, something could happen that could shift demand to the left. In other words, for whatever reason, let's say people become more pessimistic. They spend less money, which drops demand, which would move the economy below full employment level of output. And now what Keynes said is this drop in demand can be persistent. In other words, it won't necessarily snap back to get to the full employment level of output. And this process of deviation from full employment level of output can be explained by the multiplier process. In other words, when there is a slight drop in demand, that demand will propagate itself throughout the economy, and the actual drop in demand will be greater than the initial drop because of this multiplier process. And Keynes argued that things were likely to get worse because of this multiplier process before they got better. So let's give an example. Suppose expectations fall so that businesses cut back on investment spending. So let's say they stop maybe plans to build a new plant and equipment. So accumulated inventories of unsold capital will result. So if businesses spend less, that means other businesses are going to sell less because businesses sell to other businesses. And this creates what we call undesired inventory. Now, keep in mind, there's some inventory that is desirable. For example, if you're a business and you don't want to be caught off guard by maybe any unexpected level of demand, what you would do is you would produce a little bit more just in case you need it. That's desired inventory. But what is undesired is when you produce something expecting to sell it, but you don't. And that's undesired inventory. So actual investment is going to equal your desired inventory or desired investment and undesired investment. So the problem is when this gets too big. So business firms are likely to react to undesired buildups by cutting prices and reducing the rate of new output. A reduction in investment spending implies a reduction in household incomes. Firms usually cut wages and employment as they cut back production. Now, if disposable income falls, we expect consumer spending to fall as well. That just seems to follow. And again, now, consumer spending will not fall as much as income because of marginal propensity to consume. And again, the whole multiplier process is that one drop in consumer spending is going to lead to an even larger drop in overall demand because of this multiplier process. When you think about it, if I spend $1 less, that means it's $1 less income for somebody else whose income falls. Well, when their incomes fall, they spend less, which means it's less income for other people. So this is the multiplier process in effect. And that you could calculate the multiplier process by 1 over 1 minus MPC. And what we're going to do is we're going to examine this multiplier process through the whole supply and demand framework. And we'll do that in the next video.